right. The combat modernization beta that some are dubbing the second evolution of combat was released today, and it's giving us our first glimpse at the upcoming combat revamp coming next month in February. This is expanding on the ranged beta that we had a few months back and introduces more changes not only to ranged, but finally lets us experience the new vision for magic and melee as well. This is a pretty radical bundle of changes and is honestly pretty overwhelming to be presented with this much all at once, especially with the expected launch date of the final product being so soon, again, just weeks away. But that said, if you stick with me through this video, I'll do my very best to break everything down and to try and concisely showcase the most important changes for what the future of the game's combat will look like. First things first, I highly recommend that you play the beta for yourself and share your feedback with the developers in public discords and the official social media outlets. My video will hopefully give you a good sense of what to expect, what's good, what's bad, etc. But it's really important to get as much data as possible from all types of players of all skill levels so that this update can come out as polished as possible. I'm just one man, and my thoughts and opinions are not necessarily representative of the wider combat community. So if you want to playtest the beta, you'll need to navigate to the official website, open up the blog post, and all the way at the bottom, you'll have a link that will automatically open up your client into the beta world. All that said, let's finally get into the video. So to structure this video, I want to look at some of the overarching changes from this beta and then go more in depth with each of the three combat styles having their own little section. So as a whole, the big vision with this beta is to fundamentally rebalance the early and the mid-game feeling and the progression of combat. The majority of these changes are not targeted at high-level players. At least not yet. This beta is about rebuilding the foundation of combat, not yet catering to the pinnacle. Here's a direct quote from the blog post. In our eyes, once the early game is solid, we can continue to improve and expand upon the mid and end game experience. So to all the high level players who are panicking that EOC2 is going to ruin the game, that the combat styles are now just red, blue, and green reskins of necromancy, just settle down and recognize that some of the higher level and the nuanced aspects of combat might feel a little bit worse before they get better. But even within this beta, there are going to be some really big buffs that everyone is going to enjoy. To start us off, combat skills will be increased from level 99 up to level 120. That means that we will not be nearly as reliant on auras for damage or accuracy, which is going to pair very nicely with the aura removal update later this year. 120 stats also makes us less reliant on affinity debuffs like Statius Warhammer or Gothic Staff special attacks. Those things will definitely still have their place, but being less reliant on that kind of thing does make combat more accessible to all players, especially those with lower tiered weapons. Within this upgrade to 120 stats, we'll also be able to see more combat related progression unlocks upon level up, like extra accuracy on level ups or extra critical strike damage on milestone levels. With even more reward space between levels 99 and 120, this is a big W. Every combat style is now also going to get its own basic attack ability. Much like necromancy, if you're ever in doubt of what ability to press, whether you're just looking to build adrenaline, do a little bit of damage, or fill the time up of a global cooldown, you'll always have something reasonable to press with your basic attack ability. In addition to this, each of the combat styles' ability toolkit has been significantly trimmed down to reduce the overwhelming number of abilities in each style's ability book. This will also eliminate redundant abilities in each kit. For the most part, this was done pretty darn well in today's beta, with the exception of magic in my opinion, but we'll get there. One of the biggest changes that I think will get slept on, but I think is one of the coolest and most exciting changes, is a fundamental rebalance of eating food for healing. In the live game, eating a piece of food like a shark or a sailfish during combat is going to cost you 10% adrenaline, which can be super punishing. Sometimes that alone can be fatal and extremely off-putting to all players that are pursuing combat. A lot of times when you're learning or fighting a hard boss, you might be spamming your food, and with that food spam, you'll basically have zero adrenaline to use any good abilities, be that offensive or defensive abilities, which can put you in a nightmare of a position. Now, in this beta, eating is only going to cost you 3% adrenaline instead of 10, which is so much more fair. They explain it in their blog post where even if you're eating a solid food on every possible eating tick, you'll still be able to profit some adrenaline. This change alone is going to be one of the biggest difference makers in players sticking with combat and not giving up on learning, in my opinion. Another really big change comes to ability stalling, and actually I think it makes it a lot easier to execute, albeit with some trade-offs. Now you can release a stalled ability even on a new target simply by pressing target cycle or clicking on that new target. But this should make the gameplay feel a lot smoother for many players who might not even necessarily realize that they are stalling abilities. That dreaded scenario where you cast a powerful ability on a Slayer target that ends up walking too far away, and then you click on a closer monster only to lose out on that powerful ability, well, that's going to be a thing of the past with this change. Those are the biggest global changes that I'm the most interested in from this beta. There's a lot of other good stuff that's detailed in the blog post about better unlock progression for new accounts, better tutorials upon unlocks, similar to the necromancy progression where you'd get a pop-up upon unlocking a new ability with a little explanation on how that ability works. All of that is really good, but that affects brand new accounts more so than it does me, so I'm just going to gloss over it quickly there. Now, I want to get into the meat and potatoes of this beta and start taking a look at each individual combat style. I also don't want to bombard people with information and numbers going over each and every little minute detail. Like I said at the start of this video, it's already a bit overwhelming enough as it is. So as we look at each combat style, I'll quickly summarize some of the biggest changes to the toolkit and talk about the proposed style identity. It feels good to play, especially compared to the main game. Is it more powerful, less powerful, more versatile or not? Things like that. So since the last beta focused on range, let's go ahead and start there. Range removes 7 abilities that we're used to, but none of them are especially important, and the new basic attack is going to do a fair job at replacing those. Some adrenaline cost and damage values were rebalanced over the previous beta to generally feel more fair. The 25% adrenaline bombardment, for example, feels a lot better than the previously 45% adrenaline. We also have 2 new ranged abilities that got introduced with today's beta. The first is called Imbue Gales. Once applied, for the next 4.2 seconds, each ranged hit splat that you deal will deal a fair bit of additional bonus damage on top of it. That duration is going to be fairly short, so you'd want to use this ability on something that multi-hits pretty quickly, like a rapid fire or a dead shot. It's an interesting ability that one could liken to using Chaos Roar before you use Exakill, where you're using this first ability to supercharge your next ability, but you do want to make sure that your next ability will be able to take maximum benefit from that supercharge. The second ability is called Imbue Shadows. This replaces Incendiary Shot, and instead of dealing damage followed by critical hits generating extra adrenaline, this Imbue will make all of your hits, regardless of crits, generate 5% additional adrenaline. Given range proposed identity as a multi-hitting on-hit effect combat style, this is very in line with that, and this is very powerful. Once this is active, you can generate so much adrenaline, especially with abilities like rapid fire and ricochet, and being able to generate this much adrenaline means that you can lean into what I personally appreciate as the ranged combat style identity of being a specialist using a lot of fancy special attacks in conjunction with each other. So very loosely speaking, when you're playing range in this beta, a simple rotation might look like using your death swiftness, building up to Imbue Shadows, a little rapid fire for your Dracolich buff, and then spamming a bunch of powerful special attacks. Range feels a lot better in this beta than it did in the first one. It is super powerful and very streamlined to use. Honestly, for the most part, it feels even better and more powerful than the main game right now. There are definitely going to be some high-level gripes about losing some things like arrow combos, like the famous Wensborg Rico, but for 99.999% of players, range is going to feel extremely good in this beta. I was actually having a lot of fun bouncing between a couple of my old favorite bosses like Nex and Virago. That new Imbue Shadows seems really powerful for giving 5% adrenaline every hit. I almost wonder if that will get rebalanced and maybe toned down to something like 3% adrenaline per hit, but putting aside the balancing, ranged feels really good at a fundamental level. I can definitely see the vision here, and without a doubt, the progression is going to be much smoother and far less daunting for most players. I do also recognize the controversy of getting rid of some of that skill expression like the when sporing, but keeping in mind that the goal of this beta is to reestablish a smoother foundation for combat, this is getting closer and closer to being a very strong finished product. Next up is Melee. Melee is a bit of an odd one in this beta and is probably the weakest feeling of the three styles. There's a few oddities and small oversights in my opinion that we will touch on, like some of the ability rebalancing, messing with the vestments of Havoc's head effect, for example. But I think the biggest reason for Melee feeling weaker than it does in the live game is that the adrenaline building feels much more difficult to maintain compared to the other two styles, and the lack of that imbue shadows or tsunami style crit buff makes it feel like you can't really keep up with your big adrenaline spenders. That said, there are a few changes that I do really like with Melee. So first off, they've removed 14 abilities from the style, which just goes to show you how much redundancy there has been with Melee. On top of that, some abilities have been modified in interesting ways, and to me the most interesting are the bleed abilities being merged into one new ability that can be recast and empowered with each recast. You can liken it to your triple scythe from Necromancy, where Scythe 1 is a fair hit, Scythe 2 is a nice big hitting AoE, and Scythe 3 is a big finishing blow AoE. This new Dismember bleed will act the same, where the first cast gives you 5 fair bleed hits, the second reapplies 5 even more powerful bleed hits, and the third cast is dealing some brutal bleed damage. That's a super cool idea. I like this change a lot. I think in the beta it might have some problems where it's not working entirely properly with the Strength Cape passive, the Masterwork Spear passive, or some other main game bleed synergies that we're used to, but little stuff like that is not too concerning to me when I'm playtesting this beta. Those kinds of small oversights are very easy fixes, I'm sure. The more important part is the feel, and the bleeds do feel really cool. This change also gives some interesting reward space to lean into that subclass of a bleed build with Melee in the future. So that's my favorite Melee change by far. Two interesting changes, particularly for the more early game players, are the new Adaptive Strike ability and the Flurry ability giving access to some passive healing. The Adaptive Strike ability is like a combination of Cleave and Decimate from the live game, but will instead take on the property of your equipped weapon. So if you use this ability with a two-hander weapon, it will act as Cleave, giving you that front-facing AoE attack. And if you use it with dual-wield weapons, you'll get 2 hit splats on your main target. I also like that this ability generates more adrenaline than some of your other basic abilities, generating 12% adrenaline over the standard 9%. That's an interesting variation to provide to players. And we do see something similar with Necromancy, where Touch of Death generates more adrenaline than the basic attack, for example. I like that from a design and educational perspective, where I'm imagining myself as a newer player, and I see that this ability is special. It's giving me more adrenaline than my others, so it's clearly very important and should be the backbone of my rotation. That's a very nice, simple feedback loop that feels good to play. Unfortunately, though, I can't really say the same about a lot of the rest of Melee's adrenaline loop, and that's where it's going to start to fall more flat compared to the other styles and compared to the main game. The former crit buffing ability Meteor Strike was reworked to almost act like an adrenaline potion ability, where after using it, it's slowly going to feed you some adrenaline. The main problem here is that it feels way too slow compared to other styles. It doesn't let you use your most desirable and your most powerful abilities as often as you would like to. I'm talking things like your special attacks or even ultimate abilities like Overpower. On top of that, Meteor Strike is losing its classification as an ultimate ability, which messes with the vestments of Havoc adrenaline distribution. So it starts to feel really slow as a combat style. There's a lot of build up time to make the most of your short lived Berserk, and it just cannot keep up with the other combat styles in this beta. Another problem is Melee also has a couple of basic abilities, notably Chaos Roar and Punish, that I've heard some players call quote unquote non abilities, where they don't build nor cost any adrenaline. They are quite powerful and they have cool effects, but the fact that they don't contribute to adrenaline in any way is very off putting. They're very much worthwhile and imperative to use, but they also feel a little bit out of place in the rotation, where when you're using them, it almost feels like a little bit of lost lag time. Overall, I like a good bit of the spring cleaning that was done with Melee in this beta, but it's definitely missing that bonkalicious oomph that it needs to compete. Lastly, let's look at Magic. Magic's a pretty cool style in this beta and feels like a substantial buff over the main game, coming at the expense of 4-tick auto attack and some of that quality of life plus skill expression. We get a whole host of changes to Magic that are very interesting. Compared to the other styles, Magic has had the fewest abilities removed from its toolkit, and even a couple of abilities added back into the limelight. So ironically, in the beta, it might feel like Magic has the most ability and the most keybind bloat right now, which hopefully will be addressed, but there's some really good stuff in here nonetheless. I think that this will most likely be the most popular style, and probably the style that will see the most creative rotation writing coming from that new toolkit. So first up, Concentrated Blast and Sonic Wave no longer share cooldowns, and are both very much worth your while to use. So in the main game, it's pretty much one or the other. And 99% of the time, you're going to be picking Concentrated Blast of those two. In the beta, you'll want easy access to both of these abilities, so that's our first bit of keybind bloat, but it is what it is. Concentrated Blast is basically the same, and you'll still want to be using that as your number one basic ability. Sonic Wave, on the other hand, is a very interesting and extremely powerful modifier ability that reduces the adrenaline cost of your next ability by 20%. So that Sunshine that normally costs 100% adrenaline could cost 80% adrenaline. And you can even triple this effect by using the new Runic Charge before using Sonic. So you can get into this cool little wizardy flow of Runic Charge into Sonic Wave into a high adrenaline ability. Doing that, you can cast a Sunshine for as little as 20% adrenaline cost, allowing you to instantly start your Tsunami and Fractured Staff of Armadyl rotation that you're used to using from the main game. This effectively kills the need for adrenaline potions, which I don't really love devaluing Herblore like that. I was not a fan of that in the original ranged beta either, but I do like this gameplay loop of not necessarily doing a lot of upfront damage, but kind of building it up and charging up all of this magic power using a self buff, then a setup ability, then an ultimate ability, and finally blasting away your enemy. That's really, really cool. For the most part, Magic plays fairly similarly to how it does in the main game, which is very good. It's not going to be such a crazy adjustment when some of these changes come live into the game. There are some things that do feel a little bit odd, and honestly, I'm not totally sure if I dislike them or if I like them and I'm just getting used to them. And I'm still playing around in the beta to come to terms with everything. Most notably, some of these 2-tick global cooldown abilities, especially on things like Spellcast, are a bit strange. 2-tick Smoke Cloud, 2-tick Ice Barrage, no more Ice Rack combination, trying to break my habit of that occasional 4-tick auto attack, for example. Some of that stuff is just super foreign feeling to me right now. I think it will be fine for the majority of players, but having been so used to these things for so many years, I am in a little bit of a limbo state. Looking at the beta as a whole, though, there are a lot of good changes, and I can definitely see the vision that this will redefine the early and mid game experience, the early and mid game progression, and tutorialization for many players, not only to get into combat, but to stick with combat without falling into so many of the common pitfalls that have previously discouraged combat players before. There's a lot to like with this beta. Range feels super accessible and ultra powerful. Magic feels like a buff over the live game, and again, still equally as accessible. But there are also a lot of things that don't feel quite so good, like Melee's awkward adrenaline issues, these quote unquote non abilities, and the 2-tick global cooldowns being a little bit jarring. Compared to the previous beta, this is substantially more polished and a much better experience. For me personally, I feel like it's maybe 75 to 80% where it needs to be ready to launch in the live game. It's a really good foundation, but there's some adjustments to be made without a doubt. That's going to be it for my video though today. I'll look forward to seeing how this beta progresses and how the community feedback shapes the eventual launch of all of these changes. Let me know what you think about the beta in the comments below. Subscribe to my channel to stay up to date on all things RS3. Thanks for watching and see you soon.